Okay, so in the spotlight today then is Tamsin Cavallero and Susan McDonnell, and they're going to speak to us about their Inclusive Recruitment Toolkit. Take it away, guys.
Hi there, I'm Tamsin Cavallero, and I'd like to welcome you to this presentation on our Inclusive Recruitment Toolkit. So in this presentation, we're going to talk to you a little bit about the Higher Ed for All, the brief that we received, the background to this piece of work, what our vision was for it, the gathering of data and conducting the focus groups, the key findings, and the development of the toolkit. And then if there's time afterwards, we're happy to answer questions. So just a little bit about Higher Ed for All. I'm actually going to ask my colleague here, Louise, to explain a little bit about this project.
Perfect. So Higher Ed for All is about bringing full-time online students. It's a new model of learning to Ireland. And it was done in association with Disability Federation Ireland, Family Carers Ireland, Mayo Sligo, Leitrim ETB and Donegal ETB. And it is a HEA funded project. And essentially, we were trying to bring those people in that can't attend full-time campus education for a variety of reasons. Sometimes that might be a disability, they might be carers, but there may be many other reasons that we don't know behind the scenes. So that has been the focus of what we've done, and we have 2 programs currently on the CAO with another one ready to go. So through that work as well, we're interested to follow on, I suppose, to be inclusive in the workplace as well, and that has been linked in that we have had here with Open Doors and Employers for Change has kind of linked into this research here that Tamsin and Susan are doing for us. So I'll leave it back to you again, guys.
Thanks, Louise. So just to give you a bit of an idea about the brief here. So the brief that we were handed was to conduct a piece of research using an intersectional lens that would inform the development of an inclusive recruitment toolkit. And this was specifically drawing on lived experiences of underrepresented groups. So it was about providing ideas around equitable, accessible and supportive employment opportunities, being able to identify existing barriers to employment and maybe accommodations that are needed in the workplace to support employees and potential employees, and to continue to promote an inclusive and respectful work environment. So this was the kind of brief that we were handed. We began this piece of work. It was it in September we actually started it? So there was initial discussions a little bit earlier in the summer, and then we kind of began it in September.
So I'll just say a little bit about the background to all this then. So you probably already know that inclusive practice at work is actually built into legislation in Ireland, and discrimination in recruitment processes and in the workplace is prohibited under the Employment Equality Act 1998 to 2015 on grounds of gender, marital status, family status, age, disability, sexual orientation, religion, race and traveller ethnicity. Now, transgender people aren't explicitly included in the legislation, but there has been a test case and a successful case taken by a transgender woman using the Equality Act. So it seems that there is some protection for transgender people under it. Also, under the Equality Act, employers have a responsibility to provide reasonable accommodation for employees and prospective employees with disabilities to minimise any obstacles or barriers or difficulties that they might face at work. So that might take the form of physical accessibility, thinking about sensory issues, thinking about flexibility around care and responsibilities and things like that. So we have also looked at some of the literature underlying inclusive employment and recruitment practices. And there is research that shows that diverse workplaces are associated with greater profitability and innovation. So, having an inclusive workplace does make good business sense. But despite that, some groups remain underrepresented in employment. So despite the legislation and despite that it's good business sense, some groups do remain underrepresented in employment in Ireland. And that's serious because it undermines their right to participation in society. It has long-term consequences in terms of things like poverty and health. And again, there is research underlying and underpinning that. And then there's a series of ESRI reports from 2017 onwards. So Frances McGinnity and colleagues have found things, for example, I mean, there are a huge number of findings, but for example, Black people, both Irish and non-Irish, are less likely to be employed than white Irish people and are less likely to hold managerial and professional posts. In 2011, they found that only 11% of travellers of working age were in employment, when 66% of the general population were in employment. So that's a big difference. The census in 2016 showed that labour force participation rate for people with disabilities was only 30% at a time when the figure for the general population was 61%. So again, a huge difference. And then there are those disadvantages are experienced intersectionally as well. So, you know, for some people, there's more than one area of disadvantage and those things intersect. So that's kind of the background to the work that we were doing. So the aim of the toolkit, as Tamsin was saying, is really, we were thinking about trying to improve the experience of people who are seeking and securing employment, and especially people who are traditionally disadvantaged in the Irish workforce. So we were trying to produce something that hopefully will help employers to provide equitable, accessible and supportive employment opportunities and address any barriers that might be in place. And we started out by looking at what's currently available for employers to support them in kind of becoming a more inclusive workplace. And what we found was that a lot of the guides available, and there's some excellent materials, that they're quite specific. So there's a great guide around employing people with autism by As I Am, and TENI have a great guide for employing people who are transgender. So we decided we'd go for something that's broader based, but giving references and giving links to the more specific guides that are already in existence. Both myself and Tam have backgrounds as well in research with groups of people who are marginalised in Irish society. So for us, it was really important that the guide would be informed by the voices of people who've actually experienced these kind of challenges in seeking work and in starting work. And we'd like to take on board their suggestions for making things more inclusive. So that's why I suppose we've set out by drawing on the perspectives of a wide range of employees and prospective employees.
So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the data gathering. So we applied for ethical approval and were granted that. And I just thought I'd include some images here of our participant information sheets. You can see that we, at the top, there's a picture of Susan and myself and David Friel, who also was involved in gathering some of the data from some of the focus groups. So we used visuals as well, and we used language that was clear, straightforward, and outlined the process that will be required and the opportunities for people to withdraw consent at different stages if they wanted to as well. So that's an example of the participant information sheets that we designed. And then we also designed consent forms again that were kind of accessible and used a range of methods. So there was like visual, verbal and oral consent built in order to create an environment that was as inclusive as possible. And there was also consideration given to things like captioning when we conducted the focus groups through Teams, and the size of font. And I'm trying to, I think that was it. I can't think of any other aspects that we took into consideration, but a lot of thought went into how inclusive we could be when conducting the focus groups. Again, some were conducted in people's workplaces as well, and in support group settings. So the data gathering process took a considerable amount of time. One of the reasons for this was it also happened against kind of third wave of the pandemic. So there was a few delays due to COVID and, just the general difficulties of people being able to attend at certain times. So that was kind of frustrating at times. And also we really appreciated the fact that people put in the effort to engage with us and fit in around busy schedules. We also designed an introduction to explaining intersectionality in a kind of straightforward way. So this was a very short introduction that would be delivered at the start of the focus groups, just like 1 or 2 minutes, literally just explaining how you could think about different intersectional aspects of identity. So that was really just to get people thinking when they were coming to the focus group, what parts they could bring, of themselves, so what they could reflect on, and discriminations that they may experience in the workplace. So we conducted 4 focus groups and 2 individual interviews, and the data was gathered from 19 people overall. So that involved people with representations around gender, sexuality, age, migration status, race, ethnicity, disability, neurodiversity. I think, is that everything? So have I missed any? Oh, travel aroma as well. Yeah. And that was conducted over a period. So it began in October and it was completed in just recently, actually, wasn't it? About a few weeks ago. So where are we now? We're now in March. So it's taken a while just due to some of the challenges of the current situation. So now we're going to talk about the key findings, and I'll hand you over to Sue here.
Okay, so there's quite a lot in the findings, but just to take you briefly through some of them. We kind of started the report with some of the positives, I suppose, some of the key suggestions from participants to employers. So we were asking them really, what does inclusive recruitment practice look like? And I'm trying to see it on the screen there. So they thought that there should be, authentic and fair selection processes. So, for example, they said things like that it should be explicitly mentioned in a job description, in an ad, that people are actively trying to recruit for diversity. That ads, for example, should be placed in places that are wheelchair accessible. They thought that there should be visibility of diversity in the staff team and in interview panels. So one participant said how he'd made changes in his workplace, and that the interviewing panel would always have maybe a rainbow lanyard or a mug, because that was something that he had found, a barrier that he had found, that the interview panels were very, very white and very straight and very cis. So he was trying to kind of bring to the fore that visibility. They said that it was important that legislation and any policy was followed through and assessed, and that there was data gathering around ethnic identifiers. So they said, that there should be policy that's followed through, that it's not just on paper, but so that all employees can feel welcomed and comfortable at work. They said that all employers and recruitment panels should have training for diversity and inclusion. I'll come to that in a minute. It seems that many of them had experiences where that was not the case.
Reasonable accommodation.
Reasonable accommodation, yeah. So that there was reasonable accommodation at all stages of recruitment and then of starting a job. So they were kind of the main points that they wanted to make and bring to the fore for employers. And they came out of kind of, the other aspects of our data gathering. So we went through the different stages that people might encounter when they're looking for a job. So first we asked them about advertising and responding to job ads, and about their perceptions of the role of advertising practices in promoting equal access to employment. So many of them found that the phrasing of ads was a key indicator of inclusivity. So again, as I mentioned a minute ago, that it's really important to people that the ad actually says that they have a policy of inclusion, that they're actively looking to recruit for diversity, that they're actively trying to recruit for travellers, that they're disability friendly, that was really important to people. I mean, and there's a lot more as well around advertising. For example, one of the potential employees said that she didn't like seeing Google images of people in wheelchairs, for example. She said if you want to promote an image that your company is disability friendly, that you should maybe include current employees. They thought that it was important that ads were placed in accessible locations. They felt really strongly that ads should be quite specific around the essential skills and competences that are actually needed for the job. And they were quite critical of ads that used kind of stock phrases and perhaps inadvertently excluded people. So one man who was neurodiverse, he said that, you know, if an ad said you must be a good team player, that he would feel that would immediately rule him out. And a couple of other people were talking about job ads that mentioned being energetic, working in a fast-paced environment. So for somebody with a disability, for somebody who was a bit older, they felt that those ads immediately ruled them out. One of our traveller participants talked about a big focus on educational qualifications, where again that wasn't necessarily key to the job, and they pointed out that you know, travellers would have generationally been disadvantaged around education. So again, a focus on educational qualifications could be quite exclusive. They suggested recognition of non-traditional CVs might be a way forward, looking at people's work experiences. And people were very appreciative of experiences that they had with employees who were more inclusive. They talked about possibilities like having a quota, for each employee to have a quota to be inclusive and to employ groups of people from various sectors of society with various backgrounds. So moving on to applications then, participants spoke about their experiences of applying for positions. And again, there were a number of challenges at the application stage. So some of that was around actually physically applying for jobs. So sometimes they talked about the requirement to apply online forms being really confusing sometimes, being asked to print out application forms. So for somebody who didn't have a printer, that was a problem, or just applications that used really complex language that were an issue for people where English was the second language, or, you know, where there were literacy issues or anything like that. And then a few of the examples that I've put up here are about, you know, people feeling that they were going to be really discouraged, feeling that they were going to be automatically excluded if they disclosed information about themselves. So somebody there saying that if they asked about accommodations, if they had included information about their address, if they disclosed that they had stamp 3 residency status, they felt that even as they were applying, they were concerned that they just wouldn't be called for interview. Just see. Yeah, I know there's loads more. I'll move on. Yeah, I know. I see. Thanks, Tam. Yeah. So then at interview stage, there was a lot at interview stage. So they had a lot of advice for potential interviewers. So straight away, the composition of the interview panel was a problem. So they encountered a lot of entirely white, male, cis interview panels. And for many people, that was really discouraging. So that was mentioned by quite a number of participants in the research. They also a number of participants had clearly been in situations where the Equality Acts were contravened. So where, you know, there were really questionable practices going on, where a woman who had a disability was asked as a kind of a conflict scenario, as part of an interview, how would she cope with anti-disability discrimination? So she's just saying how inappropriate that was. Somebody whose ethnicity was questioned, whose when she told the interview panel she was Irish, she was disbelieved. And then somebody else with a disability who was being asked about how she would cope as a receptionist in a hotel because of the height of the desk. And there were a number of other examples like that. So a traveller being asked about his family connections and things like that, that really clearly contravened the equality legislation. Again, there's a lot more in that. So really interesting, and I think something that employers need to take heed of. So then around starting a new job, there were a number of participants who talked about how they really couldn't be themselves in certain jobs and had difficulty, and were really worried about fitting in a job. So somebody who's saying that as a traveller, that they didn't identify as a traveller in a certain area of the country because they found that, you know, life was just easier for them. And somebody else there who says that she didn't come out for quite a while in a new job because she was afraid of facing discrimination.
I just thought one of the things that would be useful for us to mention there as well was the recommendation from one of the focus group participants who'd suggested that at one of the places they'd worked, they'd had a buddy system, and how useful the buddy system was for helping them to figure out things that you wouldn't necessarily want to ask your manager. So things like accessing, you know, where could you get drag and dictate, or where do I, you know, what can I claim for under reasonable accommodation, things like that. And actually some of the findings in relation to that had come out specifically about working from home, hadn't they, in response to the pandemic. So, you know, what was it okay to ask about and things like that. So that was a really useful suggestion from one of the research participants as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's important to say that there were a lot of positive recommendations and a lot of positive experiences coming from participants, but it was also really important to include, you know, those very real challenges that they had faced. But, you know, I think that there's quite a lot in it that will inform any employer or manager who's interested in deepening their commitment to inclusive workplace, because it's really on the ground experiences. And sometimes, I was saying to Tam, sometimes it's about what not to do. There's quite a lot of advice on what not to do, but there are also those really positive recommendations.
So just to finish up, so the toolkit's been written and it's hot off the press, and that will now, I think it's informing some rollout and training that is being delivered by Open Doors and Employers for Change. So just the only other thing I want to say is just to acknowledge David, who conducted some of the focus groups for us as well. You saw his picture at the beginning when I included the image of us on the presentation overview, and you can see it on some of the participant information sheets as well. So I think that's it, unless we've any questions.
No, I don't have any questions anyway. I'm looking forward to reading the full report once you have it all out officially, and it's brilliant to have it, and I'll be circulating it amongst the college as well. It is important that we kind of, I suppose, are a little bit more aware, and I think that's what a lot of this is about. Ellen, you have a question there?
Yeah, thanks. Thought that was really interesting. I was just wondering, like, from a lot of what you were saying about the focus group feedback, like a lot of it kind of seems to be moving away from that kind of really, that kind of legislative approach where it's really black and white and kind of dogmatic, to more of like a culture, which is a little bit harder to define. And I was just wondering how you've looked, or how you've addressed that in the toolkit, or was it something that was difficult to kind of address in a toolkit?
I think one of the ways that we did that is that we used the voices of the participants as much as possible. So that forms the main body of it. And in doing that, I think we've really tried to foreground that. So it's like that, you know, quite often that's the bit in a piece of research that doesn't take centre stage, whereas we've really tried to make that the kind of underpinning of all this. And then also, you know, just with using the imagery as well, we've tried to do that to make it in a more accessible. So even when you're just looking at it, it's kind of inviting you to think differently and to consider different perspectives. So I suppose those are the two key aspects that we were trying to highlight. Would you say, Sue? Have I?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've certainly, as part of our recommendations, we've stated that, like, having a more inclusive culture at work is an ongoing process, and there are various aspects to it. But yeah, that's something that I think that we have foregrounded in our recommendations, and we've given some clues towards it. So, and as I said, sometimes that's in couched in really how not to do it. But there are also positive recommendations from people about how to, for example, include visibility in workplace culture, and how to be explicit about inclusion. So there are some how-tos in there.
Just to say as well that each section, it also has a top tips. So it has, as well as the findings and the voices, it has top tips of how to go about it. So that they're kind of like bullet points at the end of each section as well. So we're hoping that it's accessible and, you know, straightforward, and the language that's used, you know, it's very easy to engage with the material.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks a million, guys, for all your work on this. It's been brilliant.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks.